Our scripture reading this morning is from Matthew 13, 10 through 23. The disciples came to him and asked, "Why do you speak to the people in parables?" Jesus replied, "Because the knowledge of the secrets of the kingdom of heaven has been given to you, but not to them. Whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them. This is why I speak to them in parables. Though seeing, they do not see. Though hearing, they do not hear or understand. But blessed are your eyes because they see, and your ears because they hear. For truly I tell you, many prophets and righteous people longed to see what you see, but did not see it, and to hear what you hear, but did not hear it. Listen then to what the parable of the sower means. When anyone hears the message about the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what was sown in their heart. This is the seed sown along the path. The seed falling on rocky ground refers to someone who hears the word and at once receives it with joy. But since they have no root, they last only a short time. When trouble or persecution comes because of the word, they quickly fall away. The seed falling among the thorns refers to someone who hears the word, but the worries of this life and the deceitfulness of wealth choke the word, making it unfruitful. But the seed falling on good soil refers to someone who hears the word and understands it. This is the one who produces a crop, yielding 100, 60, or 30 times what was sown. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
Invite you to pray with me. Lord God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of each heart be acceptable in your sight. You are truly our blessed rock and our Redeemer. Amen. We are in a series based on what is commonly called the parable of the soils. Sometimes it's the parable of the seeds. Sometimes it's the parable of the sower. This is what we'll be doing on Sunday night in a little bit more depth. And by the way, you don't need to RSVP. Simply come out tonight, 5 o'clock at the Bridge offices on Walnut Street. The parable, of course, is about a man who goes out to sow or broadcast seed. He is scattering this all along the pathways into the fertile soil, into the rocky soil, into the thorny soil. And Jesus is telling this parable as a means of explaining why it is that some people grow faith and some people struggle to grow faith. The struggles he relates to the thorny, the barren, or the rocky soil. The places where people grow faith is, of course, the fertile soil. And now Jesus has stepped away from the crowds with the disciples, and he is explaining to the disciples why this parable applies to them. They are trying to grow some faith. They have stepped away from the crowds. Remember, we talked last week about the fact that hundreds, if not thousands of people listened to Jesus, observed him performing miracles, brought people to him to be healed. But very few made the next step, the critical step of saying, I want to do more. I want to learn how to be your disciple. Disciple, of course, means learner. And to make that commitment, right, is to step from being someone who's hearing what Jesus had to say to someone who is wrestling with that, making sense of that, and trying to bring that into play into our hearts, right? A parable is simply a means of teaching something, and in this case, Jesus is teaching how it is that we go to growing faith to a farmer broadcasting seeds. Another way of thinking about this, another way of applying the parable is to think about a road trip, and that's sort of what we're going to do this morning in a parallel parable. Is think about growing faith as going somewhere. A destination, if you will. Did you catch the story out of Ohio? No, not that story out of Ohio. The funny one about the 8-year-old girl who was pestering her mom to go to Target. Mom was busy, said they couldn't go to Target. And so while mom was distracted, the 8-year-old found the keys to the Nissan Rogue, got into it, somehow managed to get the car turned on, drove herself to Target. 8 years old, drove herself to Target. Mom figured out that her daughter was missing, and so was the Nissan. She called the police. They quickly drove to the Target, and lo and behold, there was the little girl filling up her shopping cart. She admitted that along the way she had clipped a mailbox or two, but otherwise all was good. How do we get to where we're going, right? Whether it's Target or somewhere else, we think about that. That is our parable on the parable on how we grow faith. And I want us to think a little bit about how it is that we can make the soil in our souls more fertile, which is, of course, the purpose of the parable. How do we grow our faith? I think there are 3 tools that will help us grow our faith. Now, before I introduce these, just a word about sermon development. If you've ever written a sermon, you know it's sort of a fluid thing, and usually by about Thursday at noon, I am trying to get sermon slides ready so they can be distributed and put on the overhead screens. We're trying to get bulletin notes together. And so on Thursday, the sermon may look one way, and this Sunday it looks signposts. By Saturday, it's completely changed. So in place of signposts, I'm going to be talking about navigational devices, but it's still the same principle. The first thing we need to do to grow our faith is to make sure that we're listening to the voice of Jesus. That's the signpost or navigational device. The second thing is to make sure that there are guardrails as we are traveling. And the third is to make sure we're traveling in the company of others. I think this neatly aligns, more or less, with the idea of the parable. That is, in order for the soil of our souls to be fertile, we must address the fact that we sometimes lack direction, the fact that we are sometimes easily distracted, right? The thorns, and the fact that we're not always mindful of the company that we're keeping. The first tool for us is to make sure we're listening to the right voice. Jesus said as much, right? He says, I am the way and the truth and the life. John 14. For us to grow our faith, we have to be listening to the voice of Jesus. That sounds logical, doesn't it? It makes sense that the way we grow our faith is by listening to what Jesus taught us to listen to. But all of us struggle with this. At least I struggle with this. I listen to many voices think about all the voices you've already listened to this morning. The voice of a spouse or a parent or a child, the voice of someone on the television set or on the radio, the voices of people as you came in. You heard the buzzing of bees as you came into worship this morning, right? You've listened to all of these voices, and now we're trying to intently listen to the voice of Christ. The disciples had to learn to make sure that they were listening to the voice of Jesus among all other voices. That it was becoming for them, the voice of Jesus, a sort of navigational device, right? We're all familiar with this. We get in our cars now. Most of us have cars that are equipped with some sort of navigational device that helps us find where exactly the Bridge United Methodist Church is, right? Only sometimes if you Google search things, it'll take you to crazy places. We learn to listen to that navigational device because we trust it will get us to where we're going. I personally don't like those, but I don't like to ask for directions. I'm a proud member of the male sex that believes I can find a place far better than Google Maps can. And so sometimes I'm telling my wife as we're trying to find a place, please turn the Google Maps off because I don't want to hear it. I think I know how to get to where I want to get to. And isn't that true of our discipleship? We listen sometimes to the voice of Christ, but we listen just as much to other voices. We listen to the internal voices that think we know better than Jesus how to get us to our destination. We listen to the distracting voices that tell us that we'll get to our destination, but first we've got to check out the latest TikTok video or Instagram post, right? We listen to the voices of Madison Avenue that tell us we'll get to our destination, but first we've got to go buy this thing or try this thing. Sometimes we listen to voices that are trying to help us, just not necessarily aligned with the voice of Christ, and sometimes, frankly, we're listening to voices that are not trying to help us at all. They're trying to distract us, divert us, take us off course. It's difficult for us to listen to the voice of Christ when we have so many other voices that are speaking to us? We're not alone in this. Think about the disciples, the earliest followers of Christ, right? They're listening to the voices of their family members, the people who are fishing with them. Most of them were fishermen. They were listening to the voices of the Jewish rabbis who were telling them, this is the pathway to a relationship with God. They were listening to the voices of the Roman authorities who were telling them, this is the pathway to becoming healthy, wealthy, and wise. They were listening to all of these disparate voices telling them to go in this direction or that, and they had to learn to discipline themselves to listen to the voice of Christ. This is why amongst the most precious times for the disciples were right when they would get into a boat with Jesus and they would sail away from the crowds, and even then sometimes they had trouble listening. Be honest with yourself. How much time every day do you spend listening to the voice of Christ? If you're lost in this world, if you feel like your discipleship isn't growing, your faith isn't growing, if you feel like you're stuck, ask yourself honestly, how much time am I actually spending listening to Jesus? Now, unfortunately, we can't get in a boat with Jesus anymore. Well, you can get in a boat, but Jesus isn't physically there. But we listen to Jesus by reading what he said. I always like to read out loud what Jesus said. I'm both reading it and listening to it. I shared last Sunday in the Sunday school class for teaching on United Methodism that for many years I had this bias against red letter versions of the Bible, or red letter versions. Some of you have these, are where the words of Jesus are in red. I don't know what my problem was with it, but now I am a proud proponent of it. Give me a Bible with Jesus' words in red, and I'm a happy camper. Why? Because when I'm flipping through the Gospel of Luke and I see that red ink, I'm reminded this is something Jesus said. The things that Jesus said are the things I need to be listening to, because they're the way my faith is going to grow. How much time are you spending reading the things that Jesus said, listening to what Jesus said? Balancing that against all of the other words of the other voices that are speaking to you as well. And if you feel as if you're not growing faith, if you feel as if the soil in your soul is not fertile enough, maybe it's because there's not enough of Jesus' words growing there, and you're listening there. Jesus famously said in John, "My sheep know the sound of my voice, and they listen to it." Jesus famously said about the parables, the reason why people don't understand the parables is because they are hearing them but not listening to them. They are listening to them but not applying them to their lives. They're applying to their lives but not doing them. We have to move the words of Jesus to a place of priority in our lives, to wrestle with them, to make sense of them, and then to apply them. Is Jesus your primary navigational device in this life? Or are you listening to other voices? Second truth is we need to have guardrails. I rode to a meeting in Springfield this week with my friend Mike. I always like to ride with Mike. I like to ride with Mike because it seems every time I go to a meeting with Mike, he's in a new car with fancy new devices in his car. I don't know how often he buys a car, but he buys it at least every 6 months because that's how often I'm going to a meeting with him. And the last time I boasted him that the latest device I bought for my car was an AM/FM radio. That's how far back in time I am, right? So we're riding down the road at 70 miles an hour. We're on our way to Springfield. I'm happily in the seat next to Mike, and all of a sudden I start hearing this ping, ping, ping noise. Ping, ping, ping. Ping, ping, ping. Every so often, ping, ping, ping. And I'm thinking, something's wrong with the car. And so eventually I say to Mike, "Hey, something's wrong with your car. I keep hearing a ping, ping, ping noise." And he looks at me and smiles, and he says, "There's nothing wrong with the car." And he explains to me, now you're going to be blown away by this. His car has cameras on the front of the car that see how he's driving down the road, and if he starts to cross one of those dashed white lines, or this is remarkable, folks, or yellow lines, the camera relays a message to the computer on board the car which then sends off a ping, ping, ping noise, and Mike knows he's veering out of his lane. Isn't that incredible? Had you ever heard of that before? I had not. I'm thinking, I got to get me one of these ping, ping, ping devices for my car, because I'm all the time lost in a dream world and not paying attention and veering off out of my lane. And wouldn't it be great if in those moments my car went ping, ping, ping? You need guardrails for your life. It is too easy to get diverted. It is too easy to veer off course. We all start, right, saying, I'm going to follow Jesus. I'm going to listen to his voice. Monday morning, I'm going to set my Bible next to my coffee maker, and the very first thing I'm going to do is read those red letter words of Jesus, right? We start off with such great hopes, and then, as always the case, we find ourselves veering off into other directions, other lanes, struggling. It's the human condition. One of the ways to keep us from veering off too far is to find someone in this life whom we trust, who will speak the truth in love to us, who is just a bit further down the road from us. These are our guardrails. Somebody who has a little bit more experience in this life, a little bit more experience in faith. Someone who has maybe been the places we have been and has some perspective to offer to us. Who can say to us when we're beginning to veer this way or that way, ping, 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 get back in your lane. The Bible is full of stories of people who acted in this role. They're called mentors, right? And the idea of a mentor is simply, a mentor is someone further down the road from me who will help me when I'm veering off course, get back on course again. There's some wonderful stories of mentors in the Bible. Elijah and Elisha, Mordecai and Esther, of course, Paul and Timothy. David had some mentors in his life. One of them was Nathan. You probably know the story of the time David's out walking on his rooftop. David is a man of God. He's trying to listen to God. But in this moment, he's listening to something other than God when he sees a beautiful married woman, Bathsheba, on an adjacent rooftop taking a bath. I don't know why she was taking a bath on a rooftop, but she was. And he is filled with lust for her. And because of a night spent with her, she becomes pregnant, and now David goes into full panic mode. He's listening to every voice except God. He tries to bring her husband, who's off fighting in his army, back home for a conjugal visit. That doesn't go well. Eventually, he simply has that man killed so he can marry Bathsheba and make the child legitimate. In other words, he has gone completely off course in his life. And Nathan, a man he trusts, simply comes into the palace one day and says to him, you're completely off course. You're completely off course with God. Now, when you read this story in 2 Samuel, it's easy to focus on the sin of David and how Nathan is bringing David out of that sin and showing him a path for restoration with God. But the bigger story, the broader story, is that Nathan is in the role of a mentor at this point. And the purpose of a mentor is not to destroy King David, not to belittle King David, not to bring King David down, right? But to simply restore King David into the right lane so he can go forward with God. That's the role of a mentor. You need to find someone in your life who is in that role, not to tear you down, but to bring you back into the right lane, to bring you back into alignment with God. We're not in any sense minimizing the sin of someone like King David, but what we're reminding ourselves of is the even bigger picture, which is the only way to escape out of those patterns, right, is to be listening to God and to be in a relationship with God. And that's what Nathan is doing in this moment, is bringing David back into that relationship. Do you have someone in your life right now, better yet, two people in your life, who could pull you aside and say to you, you are out of alignment with God. You're out of your lane. You're veering off course. Do you have those people? If not, how are you going to find those people? Who's going to go ping, ping, ping you're headed off into trouble and bring you back. To grow in faith, we need people further down the road from us to help us continue to grow. The third key, it matters who you are traveling with, right? I just finally got around to watching Toy Story 4. It's the latest iteration in the Toy Story franchise. It was delightful, maybe not quite as magical as the first, and I won't ruin it for you if you haven't seen it yet, but it is like all of the great road movies. What's your favorite road movie? Is it National Lampoon's Family Vacation? Is it Little Miss Sunshine? It's a Mad World? I'm getting you thinking now, right? I just watched the long trailer with Lucille Ball, which is an old film, which makes me laugh so hard. Road movies are great, right? Because what typically happens in a road movie, and this is the same in Toy Story 4, is a group of people are put together on a long road trip, and they're trying to get to a destination. As they're trying to get to that destination, right? They're arguing with each other. They're wishing somebody wasn't in the car with them. They can't wait to get to the place where they're going because they all can't stand each other in this moment. And at some point in the movie, they realize that they really are blessed to be with each other on this journey. Even Woody and Buzz reconcile at some point in Toy Story 4 to the fact that they're on this journey together. When you read the Gospels and you read about Jesus' teaching, you discover a remarkable thing. When Jesus taught disciples, he almost always taught them in groups. There's the occasional story, right, of Nicodemus at night. But almost every time Jesus taught disciples, he taught them in groups of people. And what's unique about this is that these groups of people weren't quite as homogeneous as we might think. It would make sense for Jesus to say, I'm only going to pick people who get along and teach this group of people. But when you read the stories of who he taught, for example, in his small group of disciples who he taught in this moment is Judas Iscariot, right? We know him as the betrayer of Jesus. Judas Iscariot was likely from the south. He's the one guy that's not a Galilean Jew. He's connected to the priests there. Many people think that he was independently wealthy, which is why he was named the treasurer for this group, right? He's the exact sort of guy that the zealots went around killing because they hated Jewish collaborators. So imagine Judas is in this group, and then who does Jesus pick to sit beside him? A zealot named Simon. Do you think that was by accident? He has a group of fishermen in his group, fishermen who obviously caught fish for a living. The thing fishermen tried to do is avoid the tax man at all costs. The tax man would actually tax them for every single fish that they caught. So instead of boasting that they caught 100 fish, they might say to the tax man, actually, we only caught 39 fish today, right? Who does Jesus put in the same small group as fishermen? A tax man named Matthew. Why did Jesus go out of his way to put different people together into the small groups? Because Jesus understood something about learning. We learn a lot from people who are like us, but isn't it true we learn even more from people who aren't like us? Who come from different backgrounds? Who have different perspectives? Who see the world differently than us? One of the things that Jesus' audience of farmers would have understood well is this idea of companion planting. Companion planting is simply the knowledge of what things grow well next to things or near things that aren't the same as them. In Illinois, we don't do a lot of this. We do a lot of growing massive acreage of just corn or massive acreage of just soybeans. But often in Jesus' day in the Middle East, what you would see is gardens with rows of potatoes next to rows of cucumbers, next to rows of onions. And first century planters understood that some things grow better when they're near other things. For example, onions love to grow next to beets. They love to grow next to carrots. They love to grow next to lettuce. They don't like growing next to beans or peas. Corn loves to grow next to potatoes. Corn does not like to grow next to tomatoes. Tomatoes are good friends with cucumbers and squash, not so friendly with corn or potatoes. A good farmer understood which plants grew next to other plants complimented them, helped them fight off all sorts of nasty thorns and diseases and things, helped them to cross-pollinate. A good farmer understood how to companion plant different things in order that all of the garden would thrive. Now think about this. Why did Jesus bring different people together to learn to be disciples? In order for us to thrive, to be challenged, to learn from each other. One of the truisms about American culture, and especially about churches, is the longer we get through life, the more the group of people around us look like us, walk like us, talk like us, chew gum like us, dress like us, right? We tend to go through life narrowing down the encounters that we have with people who are different from us. It happens in churches as well. There are established churches in which you go in and you quickly know, I will belong here or I will not belong here, right? You can know this almost in a heartbeat. If I am at all different from the people who are here, this isn't going to be the church for me. One of the founding principles of the Bridge, one of the things I love, many things I love about this congregation is we resolve from the beginning not to be that place. We resolve from the beginning to be a place where everyone would feel welcome. Whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, whether you're a Cub fan or a Cardinal fan or a Sox fan, whether you consider yourself conservative or progressive, whatever your background, whatever the color of your skin, whatever your sexual persuasion, whatever anything, we want to be a church where everyone will feel welcome, but not only welcome, but everyone will be encouraged to learn from each other, to value each other, to grow up alongside of each other in our faith. We are living out this vision that Jesus had for discipleship. We are companion farming, if you will. Beets are growing up next to carrots, right? We are companion farming. Here's the stretch. Bears fans are growing up next to Packers fans. Well, maybe not, but we're tolerating each other, right? We're doing this because we understand that we're more likely to grow when we are challenged and not comforted. We are more likely to grow, right, when we are considering things from a different perspective rather than the same perspective we have always considered them from. We are blessed, we are growing, we are nurturing when we are growing alongside of people who are challenging us. This is why I love small groups so much. And especially a small group that has people with different perspectives than I have in it. I find I grow here more. As the great Proverb 27 reminds us, iron sharpens iron, people sharpen people. How are you finding people in your life, in your relationship with Jesus, who are challenging you, encouraging you, giving you a new perspective? We grow better, stronger, healthier when we grow together, especially when we grow alongside each other. Jesus understood this and built a model of discipleship based on this. How do we grow faith? How do we work on the soil of our souls to make sure it's more and more fertile? By listening to the voice of Jesus, by making it the primary voice that's directing us, by finding someone further down the road who can be a guardrail to our faith, and by valuing the opportunity to grow together. Let us grow together our faith. Amen.